Rain hammered the windshield so hard I could barely see the gate anymore. Red and blue sheriff lights flashed across the lake like lightning trapped on water. 3 tow trucks idled beside my fence. HOA board members stood under umbrellas wearing matching navy jackets with Hollow Creek Estates stitched across the chest like they were about to win some kind of war. And right in the middle of my driveway stood Vanessa Holloway holding a court order over her head like it was the 10 Commandments. "By authority of the Hollow Creek Estates Homeowners Association," she shouted, loud enough for half the subdivision to hear, "this property is now under legal seizure." That got the neighbors outside. Porch lights flicked on all around the lake. People stepped onto balconies holding coffee mugs and phones. Some were recording already. Vanessa loved an audience. She pointed toward my ranch house like she was introducing a criminal on live TV. "Mr. Walker has refused repeated compliance demands and failed to pay mandatory HOA assessments. As of tonight, he no longer has legal access to this land." The crazy part? Half the people watching actually believed her. I stood there in the rain wearing my old canvas jacket and work boots, hands in my pockets, while 2 deputies waited beside the gate looking uncomfortable as hell. One of them avoided eye contact completely. That usually means somebody knows the situation stinks, but doesn't want to say it out loud. Vanessa smirked when she saw I wasn't arguing. "No speech tonight, Ethan?" she asked. "No tough ranch guy routine?" I looked past her shoulder instead. Right at the county emergency access map clipped to the side of the sheriff SUV. Then I asked the deputy one simple question. "You rerouted fire access already?" The deputy froze. Just for half a second. But I caught it. Vanessa didn't. She laughed like I'd said something stupid. "Don't start with your legal nonsense," she snapped. "The HOA owns this shoreline now." Owns this shoreline. That line almost made me smile. Because there's a big difference between managing property and actually owning it. Most people never learn that until it's too late. And what Vanessa Holloway didn't know that stormy night was that her entire luxury HOA depended on one thing. My land. Their roads. Their drainage pipes. Their emergency fire route. Their fancy little marina. Every bit of it crossed property my family never sold. Not once. But I didn't tell her that yet. Big mistake people make in fights like this. They talk too early. They show their cards because they're angry. See, angry people want emotional victories. Smart people collect paperwork. So while Vanessa stood there acting like queen of the lake, I just watched the rainwater run down the hood of her white Range Rover and listened to her dig herself deeper. "Tow the truck," she told the deputies. "And chain the gate after he leaves." One deputy cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we may need clarification on the access easement before. You have a court order." Vanessa cut in sharply. "Do your job." There it was. That little crack. Tiny, but real. The deputy looked back at me again, nervous now. I still didn't move. Didn't yell. Didn't threaten anybody. That's what confused them. Because calm scares people more than screaming when they think they're in control. Especially when lawyers are involved. One of the HOA board members whispered something to Vanessa. She waved him off and stepped closer to me, heels sinking into the mud near my gate. "You should have settled this months ago," she said quietly. "Now you're finished." I looked over at the subdivision across the lake. 62 homes glowing warm in the rain. Families inside eating dinner. Kids probably upstairs playing video games, completely unaware that their entire neighborhood was sitting on the biggest legal disaster this county had seen in 30 years. Then I looked back at Vanessa and finally spoke. "You might want to check who owns the emergency road before you lock that gate." Silence. Real silence. Even the deputy turned toward her. Vanessa's smile twitched for the first time all night. Tiny little movement. But I saw it. So did the deputy. And right there, standing in the rain with tow trucks behind her and sheriff lights flashing across the water, I realized something. She didn't know as much as she thought she did. That was her first mistake. Let me back up and tell you how a quiet lake ranch turned into a $7 million property war that nearly collapsed an entire HOA overnight. And trust me, by the time this thing ended, paperwork made a whole lot of loud people very, very quiet. But before we get into it, I gotta ask, have you ever dealt with somebody who acted like they owned property that wasn't theirs? Maybe a neighbor, maybe an HOA, maybe even family. Drop a comment below because after what happened to me, I started realizing this kind of thing happens way more than people think. My grandfather used to say land remembers people even after people are gone. I did not understand that when I was a kid. Back then the ranch was just dirt roads, splinters in my hands, and long summers smelling like pine trees and lake water. But now I understand exactly what he meant. The ranch sat about 20 miles outside Boulder, tucked between low hills and a spring-fed lake, so clear you could see trout swimming near the rocks. 62 acres. Most people think that sounds huge. Truth is, when you grow up on land like that, it feels normal. You measure life differently. Not in city blocks or traffic lights. In fence posts. In snowfall. In how long it takes fog to lift off the water in the morning. My grandfather, Walter Walker, bought the place in 1974 after coming home from Vietnam. Paid cash for it too. He hated debt. Kept every receipt in old cigar boxes inside a steel cabinet that smelled like motor oil and coffee grounds. He built the dock himself with cedar boards that still creaked the exact same way 50 years later. As a kid, I thought that sound meant home. Every morning before school, he would take me fishing just before sunrise. We would sit in silence most days. Just the sound of water hitting the dock and loons calling across the lake. Sometimes he would point toward the far shoreline and say, "One day developers are going to try to buy all this." I used to laugh because nobody wanted that land back then. Too remote. Too cold in winter. Too much mud during spring runoff. But he would just nod slowly and say, "That is why they will wait." Turns out he was right. By the time I turned 45, half the county looked different. Old ranches disappeared. Luxury subdivisions showed up everywhere. Fancy signs. Stone entrances. Tiny trees planted in perfect rows. Every neighborhood had names like Timber Ridge or Mountain Crest, even though they bulldozed the actual timber to build them. Meanwhile, I stayed at the ranch. Not because I was stubborn. Because after Claire died, it was the only place that still felt quiet. Claire was my wife. 23 years married. She taught second grade in Denver and somehow knew every answer to everything except how to slow down. Cancer took her fast. One year we were arguing over paint colors for the kitchen, and the next year I was sitting beside a hospital bed listening to machines beep in the dark. After the funeral, I could not stand the city anymore. Every street reminded me of her. Every restaurant. Every grocery store. So I packed up my truck and drove back to the lake full-time. Some people drink after loss. Some people run away. Me? I fixed fences. I rebuilt the old boathouse. I replaced warped boards on the dock one nail at a time because keeping my hands busy stopped my brain from falling apart. The ranch became the only thing holding me together. Mornings there felt different from anywhere else in the world. Mist rolled over the lake like smoke. Pine needles stayed wet until noon. You could hear cattle moving half a mile away before the sun even cleared the hills. I would drink coffee on the porch wrapped in Claire's old flannel blanket, even during summer sometimes. Sounds pathetic, maybe, but grief makes people hold on to strange things. About 2 years after I moved back permanently, construction started on the north side of the property. At first it was just trucks, then bulldozers, then survey stakes, then entire hillsides started disappearing. Trees I had known since childhood got flattened in a week. The sound never stopped either. Nail guns, backup alarms, concrete mixers, day and night. I remember standing by the fence one morning watching workers pour foundations where elk used to walk through snow every winter. That was the first time I saw Vanessa Holloway. White Range Rover. Perfect blonde hair. Expensive sunglasses even though it was cloudy outside. She stepped out holding blueprints and talking into a phone like she owned the county. The strange thing was she smiled at everybody while somehow sounding rude at the same time. You ever meet somebody like that? Sweet voice. Cold eyes. She walked right up to my fence and said, "Beautiful property you have here." I nodded. Been in the family a while. She smiled bigger. Not much longer if you ask me. This whole area is about to change. Then she looked out across my lake like she was already imagining yachts on it. I should have paid more attention to that moment. Because sometimes the first warning does not sound like a threat at all. At first, Hollow Creek Estates looked harmless. That is how these places always start. A few model homes. Clean sidewalks. Nice landscaping. Couples walking tiny designer dogs past signs talking about luxury mountain living. If you drove through quick, you would think it was just another rich neighborhood built for people escaping Denver. But after a few months, things started feeling off. The first weird thing was the shoreline. Families from the subdivision kept wandering onto my side of the lake like it was public property. Kids fishing off my dock. People dragging kayaks across my grass. One guy even tied his pontoon boat to my cedar posts like he paid taxes there. The first couple times I stayed polite. "Hey folks," I would say, "you are a little over the property line." Most apologized and moved. But then one Saturday morning, a woman in expensive hiking clothes looked me dead in the eye and said, "The HOA newsletter says lake access is shared." Shared. That word stuck in my head all day, because I knew exactly what my deed said. Nothing about shared access. Nothing about easements. Nothing about community shoreline rights. This was private land. Family land. So that evening I drove down to the sales office near the subdivision entrance pretending to be interested in buying a house. A 20-something guy named Trevor greeted me with a smile, so fake it looked painful. "You picked the perfect community," he said. "Private lake access, marina. Privileges, future kayak launch, walking trails, all HOA maintained." Then he pointed right at a giant map hanging on the wall. And there it was. My shoreline. Colored blue and labeled Community Waterfront District. I felt my stomach drop. "Who owns the lake?" I asked casually. Trevor smiled. "The association controls all recreational shoreline areas." Controls, not owns. Funny thing about salespeople. They use words very carefully when lawyers are involved. I nodded like none of it bothered me, grabbed a brochure, and left. Back at the ranch, I spread the brochure across my kitchen table beside my grandfather's old property maps. Claire used to joke that I trusted paperwork more than people. She was probably right. Paperwork tells the truth eventually. People usually do not. The next week things escalated fast. HOA signs appeared near my fence line. Private community shoreline. Members only. One sign was literally nailed into one of my cedar posts. My grandfather's cedar post. That was the first time I got genuinely angry. Still, I did not rip the sign down right away. I took pictures first. That matters more than people think. When property disputes happen, emotions feel important. They are not. Evidence is important. Dates are important. Records are important. So I photographed every sign, every location marker, every construction flag they planted near the lake. Then I drove into town and visited the county records office. The clerk there, a guy named Martin who looked about 2 years from retirement, squinted at my parcel number and frowned. "That is strange," he muttered. "Your property line should cut right through part of Hollow Creek." "Part?" I asked. Martin adjusted his glasses and leaned closer to the screen. "Actually, more than part." That was the moment my brain started buzzing. Not panic exactly. More like instinct. Like when you smell smoke before seeing fire. I went home and pulled every document my grandfather left behind. Deeds, surveys, tax receipts, old plat maps rolled up in cracked tubes. The kitchen table disappeared under paperwork for 2 straight days. Meanwhile, Vanessa kept expanding her little kingdom. Weekly HOA meetings. New rules. New fees. Residents started getting violation notices for trash cans left out too long or grass over 3 inches high. One retired couple got fined because their grandson parked a fishing boat in the driveway for a weekend. Another guy got threatened over the color of his shed. The crazy part? Most people just paid the fines because they were scared. That is how people like Vanessa win. They count on exhaustion. They count on people thinking fighting back costs too much time and money. And honestly, most of the time they are right. Then came the marina announcement. Vanessa hosted a big outdoor meeting beside the lake with catered food trucks and live acoustic music like it was some kind of festival. She stood on a temporary stage, smiling at residents while giant renderings showed future docks extending right across my section of shoreline. Hollow Creek Estates is entering a new era, she announced proudly. Our residents deserve premium waterfront amenities. I stood in the back wearing an old jacket while nobody paid attention to me. Vanessa spotted me halfway through her speech, though. You could tell immediately by the way her smile tightened. "Some people resist progress," she said loudly, staring directly at me now. "But this community will move forward whether they like it or not." A few residents clapped awkwardly. Then she added something that changed everything. "The association now maintains full authority over all lake access and adjacent ranch property enforcement." Adjacent ranch property enforcement. That was not just rude anymore. That was legal language. Deliberate legal language. And the second I heard it, I realized Vanessa Holloway was not bluffing anymore. She honestly believed she had power over my land. 3 days after Vanessa made that little speech beside the lake, I woke up to the sound of metal clanging outside my house. Not cattle, not construction equipment, fence posts. I stepped onto the porch holding my coffee and saw two contractors unloading rolls of black chain-link fencing right near the shoreline. They were planting stakes directly into my grass like they had lived there their whole lives. One guy had a clipboard. The other kept checking measurements against a printed map with the Hollow Creek logo on top. I walked down the hill slow, trying not to let my temper get ahead of my brain. "Morning," I called out. "You boys lost." The older contractor looked up nervously. We are installing the HOA shoreline barrier." "On whose property?" I asked. He pointed toward the clipboard immediately. "Sir, we got approved site plans and county authorization." There it was again. Approved. Authorized. Official-sounding words people hide behind when they want you to stop asking questions. I looked closer at the map. The fence line cut nearly 40 feet into my land, straight through the old path my grandfather used to drive his tractor down to the dock. "This survey is wrong," I said calmly. "You are over the property line." The younger contractor shrugged. "Take it up with the HOA man. We just build what they tell us." About 20 minutes later, Vanessa arrived in her white Range Rover wearing spotless boots that had clearly never touched mud before. She stepped out smiling like she was attending a ribbon-cutting ceremony. "Ethan," she said sweetly, "you should have received notice about the shoreline improvements." "You mean the fence on my land?" Her smile tightened a little. "The association maintains authority over this recreational corridor now." Recreational corridor. That was a new one. I took a sip of coffee. Funny. My deed still calls it private property. Vanessa folded her arms. "You really need to stop clinging to outdated records." Outdated records. Let me tell you something. When somebody starts calling legal property records outdated, pay attention. That usually means they do not want those records looked at too closely. I pointed at the fence stakes. "You need to remove those." Vanessa shook her head slowly like she was talking to a stubborn child. "No, Ethan. What you need is to cooperate before this escalates." Then she handed me an envelope. Certified mail. Inside was an HOA compliance notice claiming I owed nearly $12,000 in unpaid shoreline maintenance fees, emergency road assessments, and non-member recreational penalties. I actually laughed. Reading it. "You are billing me for using my own lake." Vanessa did not laugh back. "Failure to comply may result in property liens and legal seizure." There it was. The first real threat. Not gossip. Not fake friendliness. Actual legal pressure. Most people panic when they see official documents. That is the trick. The paper itself scares them before they even understand what it says. But years ago, Claire taught me something during her cancer treatments. Slow down before reacting to bad news. Read everything twice. Fear makes people careless. So instead of arguing, I folded the notice neatly and stuck it in my jacket pocket. Vanessa looked disappointed. I think she wanted a fight. "That all?" I asked. "For now," she replied. "You are making this harder than it needs to be." Then she climbed back into her SUV while the contractors kept digging holes into my land. I stood there listening to the sound of steel posts slamming into dirt my grandfather bought 50 years earlier. The crazy thing? The county actually backed them up at first. Later that afternoon, a zoning inspector named Kyle showed up after Vanessa filed a complaint claiming I was interfering with approved development work. Kyle looked about 26 years old and nervous enough to sweat through his shirt. He studied the maps, glanced at the fence line, then quietly said, "Everything submitted to us appears valid." Appears valid. Another important phrase. Notice nobody ever says definitely valid when lawyers might get involved later. I asked Kyle one question. "Did anybody verify the original boundary surveys?" He hesitated. Tiny pause. Barely noticeable. "The developer submitted certified plats," he answered carefully. Certified plats. Submitted by who? That was the question nobody seemed eager to answer. By sunset, the fence stretched nearly 200 feet across my shoreline. Residents from Hollow Creek walked past, smiling like the lake suddenly belonged to them. One woman even told her kids, "See? Now we finally have private access." Private access? On my property. That night I sat at my kitchen table staring at the compliance notice while rain tapped softly against the windows. Claire's old flannel blanket still hung over the chair beside me. The room smelled like coffee and damp cedar from the dock outside. I spread out my grandfather's surveys again beside the HOA documents. Side by side. Old paper versus new paper. Truth versus confidence. And that was when I noticed something strange. The property coordinates on the HOA filing did not fully match the county parcel maps. Just a few numbers off. Tiny discrepancy. Easy to miss. But in land records, tiny mistakes can destroy million-dollar projects. I leaned back slowly and read the filing again. Then a third time. And right there at midnight, while Hollow Creek celebrated their shiny new shoreline fence, I realized Vanessa Holloway had made a very expensive mistake. Once I noticed those parcel numbers did not match, I stopped looking at Hollow Creek like a neighborhood problem. It became a puzzle. And puzzles are dangerous when the wrong people think nobody is paying attention. The next morning I drove back into town before sunrise carrying 2 cardboard tubes full of old survey maps from my grandfather's cabinet. The county records building smelled exactly like every government office in America. Old carpet, burnt coffee, and paper that had been sitting untouched since the Reagan administration. Martin spotted me walking in and immediately sighed. "You are back already? I think your developer filed bad coordinates," I told him. That got his attention. People in county offices hear angry complaints every day. But specific claims? Those make them nervous. Martin pulled up the digital parcel overlay again while I unrolled one of the old surveys across the counter. Hand-drawn boundary marks. Survey stamps. Recorded easements. My grandfather kept everything. Thank God for old ranchers who never throw paperwork away. Martin adjusted his glasses for about the 10th time and leaned closer toward the screen. "Well, I will be damned," he muttered quietly. The HOA subdivision line did not stop at my property edge like their filings claimed. According to the original county survey, one entire section of Hollow Creek crossed directly into Walker Ranch land. Roads, utility trenches, drainage routes, even part of the marina expansion, all sitting where they should not be. How does something like this even happen? I asked. Martin gave the kind of laugh people use when they know the answer is ugly. Developers submit revisions all the time. Most people never compare them against older records. That sentence stuck in my head all day. Most people never compare them. That is the whole game right there. People trust whatever looks official. Fancy binders, new maps, legal words. They assume somebody else already checked everything. But sometimes nobody checks. Or worse, somebody checks and stays quiet. On the drive home, my phone started buzzing nonstop. Hollow Creek residents were now getting hit with emergency assessments. $6,000 for marina upgrades. $4,000 for shoreline stabilization. Special road maintenance fees. One retired guy named Hank Miller stopped me outside the gas station looking pale as a ghost. "You know anything about this HOA nonsense?" he asked, holding a letter and shaking hands. Hank was 72 years old and drove a truck older than mine. Nice guy. Vietnam veteran. Lived quietly with his wife and spent most mornings fishing near the North Dock. The letter claimed he owed over $9,000 within 30 days, or the HOA could begin lien proceedings against his house. "I already paid dues this year," he said. "Now they are saying the lake project went over budget." I read the notice carefully. Vanessa had buried one line halfway down the second page. Infrastructure compliance correction costs. Strange wording. Very strange. Did they explain what that means? I asked. Hank shook his head slowly. They just keep saying the county changed requirements. That was when another little piece clicked into place. Vanessa was scrambling for money. Big money. Fast. A week later, the situation got uglier. HOA board members started patrolling the shoreline in golf carts like mall security guards. Residents got warnings for using unapproved lake areas. A teenager received a $500 fine because he launched a canoe from the wrong dock. One family got threatened after their Labrador escaped into a restricted shoreline zone. Restricted shoreline zone. On my land. Meanwhile, construction crews kept expanding toward the marina. Concrete trucks rolled past my fence before sunrise every morning. Utility crews dug trenches near the emergency access road. And every single night, I sat at my kitchen table studying maps while Claire's old coffee mug sat beside me untouched. The more I looked, the worse it got. Hollow Creek was not just crossing onto my property by accident. Their entire infrastructure depended on it. Drainage runoff from the subdivision flowed through culverts installed on Walker land. The marina access road crossed my recorded parcel by nearly 80 feet. Worst of all, the emergency wildfire evacuation route for the whole subdivision ran directly through my ranch gate. That explained the deputy's reaction back in the storm. If access rights failed, half the neighborhood could lose emergency compliance instantly. And in Colorado mountain country, wildfire access rules are no joke. Insurance companies pull coverage over things like that. I decided to test something. Quietly. No lawsuits yet. No dramatic speeches. Just information gathering. I called the county fire department pretending I wanted to update emergency contact information for my ranch. A battalion chief named Ray Thompson came out 2 days later in a red pickup coated with dust. Good guy. Straight shooter. He studied the road crossing my land and frowned almost immediately. Wait, he said. This gate is private? Always has been. Ray looked back toward Hollow Creek in the distance. That subdivision uses this as their secondary evacuation route. Did they ever record a permanent easement? I asked casually. Ray blinked. I assumed they had one. Assumed. Another dangerous word. We stood there in silence while wind moved through the pine trees above us. Finally, Ray scratched his beard and muttered, "If they do not have legal access here, this could become a serious county issue." Serious county issue. Understatement of the year. That night, I drove past Hollow Creek just after sunset. Families were grilling on patios. Kids rode bikes under decorative street lamps. Music drifted across the lake from somebody's backyard party. Nobody had any idea their neighborhood sat on top of a legal sinkhole. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I realized something important. Vanessa Holloway was not just arrogant. She was desperate. Because people who are confident do not invent fake authority this aggressively. People who are hiding something do. The next 2 weeks turned into the strangest investigation of my life. I stopped sleeping normal hours. I would wake up at 3 in the morning, make coffee, and sit at the kitchen table surrounded by maps while rain tapped against the windows and coyotes howled somewhere up in the hills. The deeper I dug into Hollow Creek's paperwork, the uglier it got. And the craziest part? The evidence had been sitting in public records the entire time. Anybody could have found it. Nobody bothered to look. That is something people need to understand about property law. The truth is usually not hidden. It is just buried under paperwork boring enough that most people never read it. I started comparing every county filing line by line. Original ranch surveys, tax parcel records, development plats, utility permits, drainage approvals, fire access maps. By day for my eyes felt like sandpaper. But then I found it. One missing document. 1. Hollow Creek had county approval for temporary construction access across my ranch from 11 years earlier. Temporary, not permanent. The permit allowed developers to move heavy equipment through part of my property while building roads on the North Ridge. Expiration date, June 17th, 11 years ago. There was no permanent easement recorded afterward. No transfer agreement. No signed access grant from my family. Nothing. I stared at that missing gap for almost 10 minutes straight. Then I whispered out loud to an empty kitchen, "Oh my God," because suddenly everything made sense. The fake shoreline authority, the emergency assessments, the panic over infrastructure costs. Vanessa was trying to force legal control over land they never officially secured in the first place. Hollow Creek was basically operating on assumptions held together with expensive landscaping and intimidation. The next morning, I drove straight to a property attorney in Boulder named Dana Mercer. Older woman. Sharp eyes. No nonsense. Her office smelled like leather folders and peppermint tea. I spread my maps across her conference table while she read silently for almost 20 minutes. Finally, she leaned back slowly and looked at me over her glasses. "Mr. Walker," she said carefully, "do you understand what this means?" "I think so." "No," she replied. "I do not think you do." That got my attention fast. Dana tapped the emergency access route on one of the maps. Their subdivision compliance depends on legal road access through your property. Then she pointed at the marina utility trench. "These lines cross your parcel too." Another tap. "And drainage runoff." Another tap. "And part of their shoreline retention system." She folded her hands together. If these easements were never properly recorded, then this entire HOA has exposure problems. Exposure problems. Lawyers always use calm words for terrifying situations. Can they really lose the neighborhood over this? I asked. Dana shook her head slowly. Probably not the homes themselves. Courts usually protect innocent homeowners. But the HOA board? The developer? The financing? Insurance? That is another story. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. "You are not dealing with arrogance anymore. You are dealing with liability panic." Liability panic. Suddenly Vanessa's behavior made perfect sense. The fines. The pressure. The fake authority. She needed control over my land before somebody discovered they never legally had it. And if she could bully me into signing agreements or paying HOA fees, it would help create the appearance that I accepted their jurisdiction. Dana warned me not to move too fast. "This is important," she said, pointing a pen at me. "Do not threaten them yet. Do not block roads. Do not remove fences. Stay calm." "Why?" I asked. "Because right now they are still making mistakes publicly." Smart woman. That afternoon, I started noticing even more cracks inside Hollow Creek. Residents were angry now. Really angry. The HOA announced another emergency meeting after insurance auditors requested. Updated infrastructure documentation. People packed the clubhouse parking lot. I stayed in my truck across the street, just watching. Through the windows, I could see Vanessa standing at the front of the room, smiling way too hard. You can always tell when somebody is losing control by how aggressively cheerful they become. Residents started coming out 40 minutes later looking furious. One guy slammed his truck door so hard the alarm went off. Another woman was crying beside her SUV while talking on the phone. Hank Miller spotted me parked nearby and walked over fast. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. "Now they want $15,000 per home for infrastructure corrections." Infrastructure corrections again. Same phrase. Same panic. "Did they explain why?" I asked. Hank snorted. Vanessa kept saying legal compliance updates and county requirements changed. Nobody understood half the words she used. That was intentional. Confused people stopped asking questions. But not everybody. One younger resident, named Melissa Carter, started digging into county records herself after the meeting. I found that out because she showed up at my ranch 2 days later carrying a folder thick enough to stop a bullet. "You are Ethan Walker, right?" she asked nervously. "Depends who is asking. I think the HOA lied to us." Now we were getting somewhere. Melissa and her husband had bought one of the newer lakefront homes 8 months earlier. She handed me copies of marketing brochures promising permanent private waterfront access and guaranteed emergency evacuation compliance. Guaranteed. There is that dangerous word again. "Our mortgage lender used these documents," she said quietly. "If they are false," she did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. I looked out toward Hollow Creek while evening sunlight reflected across the water. Kids rode bicycles down streets built partly on my grandfather's ranch, while their parents worried inside million-dollar homes they might have bought into a legal nightmare. And somewhere in the middle of all of it sat Vanessa Holloway desperately trying to hold the whole thing together with threats and paperwork. But here is the thing about paperwork. Fake confidence can survive arguments. It cannot survive records. Most people think winning a property fight means filing a lawsuit immediately. March into court. Slam papers on a desk. Make speeches. That works in movies. Real life is slower and meaner than that. Dana Mercer explained it perfectly during our second meeting. "Right now," she told me, "they are still digging." I frowned at her across the conference table. Digging what? Their own hole. Smart woman. The more I thought about it, the more I realized she was right. Every week Hollow Creek kept spending money on land they did not fully control. Every new HOA notice, every marina expansion invoice, every public statement claiming authority over my ranch created another layer of liability. So instead of exploding, I stayed quiet. That drove Vanessa absolutely crazy. She wanted a loud, angry ranch owner she could paint as unstable. What she got instead was a guy calmly collecting records while she kept talking herself deeper into trouble. The first thing I did was hire an independent survey crew from Fort Collins. Not connected to the county. Not connected to the developer. Just old-school land surveyors with GPS equipment, drones, and enough experience to smell bad paperwork from a mile away. Their lead guy was named Curtis Bell. Gray beard. Sunburned neck. Looked like he had spent 40 years arguing with fence posts. He studied the maps for about 5 minutes before shaking his head slowly. "Son," he muttered, "this subdivision is sitting in a bad spot." That was probably the politest way anybody could describe the mess. Over the next 10 days, Curtis and his crew walked nearly every inch of the ranch. They planted markers, checked old corner pins buried under brush, compared satellite overlays with historical county records. Meanwhile, Hollow Creek kept acting like none of this mattered. Vanessa announced Phase 2 of the Marina project during another HOA meeting. Bigger docks, expanded waterfront seating, new kayak storage. She even approved decorative stone entry walls near the emergency access road. The emergency access road that crossed my property. Dana almost laughed when I told her, "Keep documenting everything," she said, "especially public statements." So I did. Every HOA newsletter, every resident email, every recorded meeting clip posted online. Vanessa loved posting updates. She thought confidence made things true. One video actually showed her standing beside the lake saying, "The association maintains full legal control over all shoreline operations and access corridors." I downloaded that video immediately. People have no idea how dangerous public statements become once lawyers get involved. Around this time, the residents started turning on each other. Some blamed Vanessa. Others blamed the county. A few blamed me because they thought I was secretly trying to destroy property values. One afternoon, I stopped by the hardware store and overheard two Hollow Creek residents arguing near the checkout line. "You told us the lake access was permanent," one man snapped. The other guy threw his hands up. "That is what the HOA told everybody." Then both of them noticed me standing nearby and suddenly went quiet. That became a pattern. People stopped seeing me as some grumpy ranch owner. Now they looked at me like a walking lawsuit. Melissa Carter kept feeding me information too. HOA board members were panicking behind closed doors. Insurance companies requested updated easement verification. One lender paused approvals for 2 pending home sales. Contractors complained about delayed payments. Vanessa responded by getting even more aggressive. More fines, more legal threats, more emergency assessments. It was like watching somebody duct tape cracks in a dam while the water kept rising. Then Curtis called me one Thursday morning, sounding more serious than usual. "You need to come see this." I drove out near the North Ridge where his crew had uncovered an old survey marker buried under weeds and loose dirt. Curtis pointed toward a fresh retaining wall, Hollow Creek, built 6 months earlier. "That wall should not exist," he said flatly. "Why?" "Because the entire structure crosses onto your parcel by nearly 30 feet. 30 feet. Concrete retaining wall. Drainage system attached. HOA landscaping built around it already. Expensive. Mistake. Very expensive." Curtis handed me updated overlay maps showing something even worse. Hollow Creek's wildfire evacuation route did not just touch my land. It depended on it completely. If access rights failed, county emergency compliance for almost half the subdivision could collapse overnight. I stood there staring at the maps while wind pushed through the pine trees overhead. "How did nobody catch this?" I asked quietly. Curtis snorted. "Maybe somebody did." That answer sat in my stomach all day, because by then I was starting to suspect this was not simple incompetence anymore. Somebody somewhere probably noticed the missing easements years ago, but by then too much money was already involved. Easier to stay quiet and hope nobody challenged it. Happens more than people realize, especially when rich developments and county politics start mixing together. A few days later, Dana uncovered another ugly detail. The original developer had dissolved the construction company shortly after Hollow Creek finished Phase 1. New corporate name, new LLC, different management structure. Classic move. They insulated themselves, Dana explained. If this blows up, they wanted liability spread everywhere. Residents, HOA board, contractors, county approvals, everybody touching the mess together. That was when I finally understood why Vanessa was acting so desperate. She was not protecting a neighborhood anymore. She was trying to hold together a legal house of cards built on assumptions, shortcuts, and missing paperwork. And here's the crazy part. If she had simply treated me fairly from the beginning, none of this probably would have happened. We could have negotiated proper easements years earlier. Simple agreements. Reasonable access. Everybody happy. But fake authority changes people. Once somebody gets used to controlling others, they stop asking permission. They start believing they own things they merely occupy. That was Vanessa's real problem. She confused power with ownership. And paperwork has a funny way of correcting people like that. The county emergency hearing happened on a Thursday night during the first snow of November. By 6 o'clock, the parking lot outside the administration building was already packed with SUVs, contractor trucks, and nervous residents standing in little groups under the cold yellow lights. You could feel the tension before anybody even walked inside. People whispered when they saw me. Some looked angry. Some looked scared. A few just looked tired. Hollow Creek residents had spent months getting buried under fees and legal language they barely understood. And now county officials suddenly wanted an emergency infrastructure review. That alone terrified people. Inside, the hearing room looked more like a courtroom than a public meeting. Long tables, Microphones. County maps projected onto giant screens. Dana Mercer sat beside me, flipping calmly through folders thick enough to stop a door. Across the aisle, Vanessa Holloway arrived with two attorneys wearing matching dark suits and expressions that screamed expensive by the hour. She walked in like she still controlled the room. Perfect hair, perfect smile, pearl necklace. But I noticed something new immediately. Her hands shook slightly while organizing her papers. Tiny movement. Most people would miss it. I did not. The room filled fast. Residents packed every chair along the walls. Reporters from 2 local stations showed up too after rumors spread online about possible easement violations. The county fire marshal, Ray Thompson, sat near the front reviewing emergency evacuation maps with a deep frown on his face. Vanessa noticed him too. You could actually see the color leave her face for a second. Then the hearing started. County Commissioner Elaine Porter opened with the usual formal language nobody listens to until their property value depends on it. This hearing concerns unresolved access and infrastructure compliance issues involving Hollow Creek Estates. Just hearing those words made the room buzz. Vanessa stood first. Of course she did. People like her always speak first because they think confidence wins arguments. She spent nearly 20 minutes presenting charts, permits, HOA records, and development timelines. Her voice sounded smooth and practiced. The association has maintained operational authority over shoreline management and emergency access corridors for years, she said confidently. Any current discrepancies are minor clerical issues already under review. Minor clerical issues. That almost made Dana laugh beside me. Then Vanessa made her biggest mistake of the night. She pointed directly toward me in front of the entire room and said, Mr. Walker has repeatedly attempted to interfere with lawful HOA operations despite lacking jurisdiction over community infrastructure. Lacking jurisdiction. Dana quietly leaned toward me and whispered, that statement alone is going to age terribly. Then the county commissioner called Ray Thompson to testify. The entire room got quiet immediately. Fire marshals are different from HOA lawyers. They do not care about neighborhood politics. They care about whether people survive emergencies. Ray stepped up carrying updated evacuation maps and spoke in the calm voice of somebody used to explaining serious problems to stubborn people. Our department recently reviewed Hollow Creek emergency access compliance. He began. During that review, we discovered the subdivision's secondary wildfire evacuation route crosses private land belonging to Mr. Ethan Walker. You could actually hear people stop breathing. Ray continued flipping through maps projected on the screen behind him. At this time, county records do not show any permanent recorded easement granting Hollow Creek Estates legal emergency access through that property. Boom. There it was. Public. Official. Irreversible. The room exploded into whispers instantly. Residents turned toward Vanessa so fast it looked choreographed. One man near the back stood up halfway out of his chair. What do you mean there is no easement? He demanded loudly. Commissioner Porter banged her gavel immediately. Please remain seated. But the panic had already started spreading. Ray was not even finished. Additionally, he continued carefully, certain drainage structures and marina utility routes also appear to cross private property not currently under HOA ownership. Another explosion of whispers. Somebody muttered, "You have got to be kidding me." Vanessa jumped to her feet immediately. These are preliminary interpretations, she snapped. The association has operated legally for years. Dana finally stood up beside me. Calm, slow, dangerous. She handed copies of the original recorded surveys to the commissioners while giant overlays appeared on the projector screen. Old parcel lines, updated drone maps, utility routes, emergency access corridors. Everything matching perfectly now. Dana spoke quietly into the microphone. The Walker family never transferred permanent access rights for multiple sections currently used by Hollow Creek infrastructure. Then she dropped the final hammer. We also obtained archived county records showing the developer's construction access permit expired 11 years ago. Silence. Pure silence. Even Vanessa stopped moving. Dana clicked one more slide onto the screen. Vanessa's own HOA newsletter appeared enlarged for the entire room to see. The quote from her video sat highlighted in yellow. Full legal control over all shoreline operations and access corridors. Dana looked directly at the commissioners. The association publicly claimed ownership authority it could not legally verify. Vanessa's attorney immediately objected. Mischaracterization. Dana did not even blink. Then we welcome production of the permanent easement records. No answer came. Not from Vanessa. Not from her lawyers. Nothing. Because there were no records. And everybody in that room suddenly understood it at the exact same time. Hollow Creek's entire authority structure rested on paperwork that did not exist. Then the real collapse started. Residents began shouting questions from every direction. Did you know about this? What happens to our insurance? You told us the marina was fully approved. What did we pay all those assessments for? Vanessa tried to regain control. Please calm down, she snapped into the microphone. These issues are administrative and temporary. That was when I finally stood up for the first time all night. I had stayed quiet for months, letting records speak instead of emotions. But now every eye in that room turned toward me. No, I said calmly. Temporary was the construction permit your HOA ignored for 11 years. Dead silence again. Vanessa stared at me like she wanted to interrupt, but could not find words fast enough. I looked around the room at all the frightened homeowners sitting there. Families, retirees, couples who trusted paperwork they never fully understood. I never wanted anybody's home, I said quietly. I wanted people to stop pretending my land belonged to them. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, nobody in that room looked at Vanessa Holloway like she was in charge anymore. The fallout hit Hollow Creek fast. Faster than anybody expected. Within 48 hours of the county hearing, 2 mortgage lenders froze pending home sales inside the subdivision. Insurance companies requested emergency compliance reviews. Contractors stopped showing up to finish the marina expansion because nobody wanted to work on property tangled in legal disputes. It felt like the whole neighborhood suddenly slammed into a wall nobody saw coming. And right in the middle of it stood Vanessa Holloway, still trying to pretend she had control. 3 days after the hearing, she sent out another HOA newsletter calling the situation temporary misinformation. That lasted about 6 hours before screenshots started spreading all over the neighborhood Facebook page. Residents were furious now. Really furious. People who once nodded quietly during HOA meetings suddenly wanted answers about every fine, every assessment, every threat letter they had ever received. Hank Miller told me the clubhouse looked like a war zone during the next emergency board meeting. Folks were screaming over each other, he said. One guy demanded every penny back. Melissa Carter and several other homeowners hired independent attorneys almost immediately. Turns out people become very motivated once they realize fake authority may have cost them thousands of dollars. Dana Mercer kept warning me to stay patient. The emotional part is ending, she said. Now comes the paper part. She was right. Over the next month, county investigators reviewed Hollow Creek's filings one by one. That is when the deeper problems surfaced. Missing easement renewals. Incorrect parcel references. Conflicting shoreline maps. Even worse, investigators discovered multiple HOA assessment increases were approved using infrastructure claims Vanessa already knew were legally questionable. That detail changed everything. Mistakes can sometimes be forgiven. Knowing about problems while still collecting money? That gets ugly fast. Vanessa resigned as HOA president before Christmas. Short email. No apology. No explanation. Just effective immediately. Funny thing is nobody seemed sad to see her go. Not even people who used to defend her. Once trust breaks in a neighborhood, it breaks hard. The county eventually forced Hollow Creek into temporary administrative oversight, while attorneys negotiated new legal agreements. That part took months. Long meetings. Endless paperwork. Survey updates. Easement drafts. Honestly, it was boring as hell most days. But boring paperwork is usually what saves people in the real world. Not speeches. Not threats. Documents. Records. Patience. In the end, the courts protected the homeowners themselves. Families did not lose their houses. Kids did not lose their bedrooms. That mattered to me. Those residents were not the real villains here. Most of them bought homes believing the paperwork had already been checked by professionals. They trusted the system the same way normal people do every day. So instead of trying to destroy Hollow Creek, Dana and I worked out permanent legal easements that actually made sense. Proper emergency access. Proper utility routes. Proper shoreline agreements with recorded boundaries this time. Real paperwork. Signed correctly. Filed correctly. The HOA itself changed completely afterward. Residents voted to dissolve the old board structure and replace it with a much smaller community association with outside financial oversight. Translation: no more neighborhood dictators pretending they were kings of the lake. Hank Miller actually laughed the first time he saw the new rules packet. 3 pages, he said. Not 72. The best moment came quietly one cold morning in early spring. Snow still covered parts of the hills, but the lake had finally thawed enough for fishing again. I was down at the dock, replacing an old cedar plank when I heard footsteps crunching across the gravel behind me. It was Melissa Carter's little boy, maybe 8 years old, bundled up in a winter coat too big for him. He held a fishing rod almost taller than he was. "Mom says this is your dock," he said carefully. "That is right." He looked nervous for a second. "Are we allowed to fish here now?" Allowed. That word hit me harder than I expected. I looked out across the lake where morning fog drifted over the water exactly the same way it did when my grandfather brought me here as a kid. Same cold air. Same pine smell. Same quiet. Funny how land survives people. "Yeah," I told him. "Long as you respect the water." His whole face lit up instantly. A few minutes later, Melissa walked down carrying coffee and thanked me again for not going nuclear on the neighborhood. That made me laugh. "Trust me," I said. "I thought about it. But the truth is my grandfather taught me something bigger than revenge. Ownership is not about bullying people. It is about responsibility. Knowing where your rights end and somebody else's begin. That is what Vanessa never understood. She thought power came from control. Real power comes from knowing the truth and staying calm long enough to prove it. These days the lake feels peaceful again. The fake shoreline signs are gone. The illegal fence disappeared months ago. And every now and then I still sit on the dock before sunrise wrapped in Claire's old flannel blanket listening to the water hit the cedar boards. Some mornings I think about how close this whole thing came to turning ugly. All because a few people believed confidence mattered more than records. But paperwork has a funny way of humbling loud people eventually. Especially when the land remembers who really owns it.